They fought back the snow, survived the winters just to grow. Their families became the tribes upon the northern shores. They hunted mammoths, shared his flesh, made lovely clothes in which to dress, became a people and one tribe, the Northerners were born. They wandered out into the world, the diaspora then some furled, and centuries and countless wars, so Northerners expand. The Romans feared the northern men, who in the end defeated them by asking for a refuge from the wars in their own land. And when the Christians brought their word, the greatest song we've ever heard, we built our castles, grew our herds, and Christendom was born. Christendom is coming. Christendom is coming. Christendom is coming. Christendom is coming.
The Northerners, they're coming across the sea.
With ancient times behind us now, Britannia stands upon the prow, and you proud men of action and of steel are born and forged. They pioneer across the globe, take armies, priests, and modern clothes, and plant their diaspora on the southern sunburned shores.
The Northerners, the black-proofed of great enemy, the Zulu and the Maori, but no match for Her Majesty. The Northerners are here.
With Union Jack now stationed high for empire, the end is nigh. For industry and politics will bring them to their knees.
The Northerners, ha, the Northerners, they're coming across the sea. The Northerners are coming. They're coming across the sea.
Were you born at the turn of the century? Did you know how the violence to come? Did you dream of dying young with a pair of infant sons and no wife, no more life, not for you? Which way, Northman? Can you sing me back home? Where is my home?
The Northerners, ha, the Northerners, they're coming across the sea. The Northerners are
Coming,
the Northerners are
coming,
the Northerners
are coming.
they're coming across the sea.
We need to talk about today, for things have changed in every way. The Northerners are broken and our lands are being claimed. Minorities in our own towns, our blood remembers crossing bounds into the Roman city gates, where we did this to them.
The Northerners
Are coming,
the Northerners
are coming,
the Northerners
are coming.
they're coming across the sea.
The fruit of Northern Empire is rotten to its very core. 'Twas Satan leading Northern men to colonize the world. But sorry wasn't good enough, the reparations aren't large enough, diversity isn't strong enough, and Northerners are to blame. The Northerners are homeless. The Northerners are broken. The Northerners are homeless. The Northerners are broken. The Northerners are homeless. The Northerners are broken. The Northerners are homeless. Go home, Northern men.
They're coming across the sea.
Go home, Northern men.
Coming across the sea.
There's a place that I can call my home.
They're coming across the sea.
Can you show me how to get back home?
They're coming across the sea.
Which way, Northern? Have you seen my
Across the sea.
home?
Welcome back to American Zarathustra. This is Imperium Art. episode 24. Very, very proud to have with us tonight James Fox Higgins. How are you today, sir?
I'm doing great. I've just emerged from 3 days in the belly of the whale with a chest infection, and I've got so much energy today. I'm very excited to talk to you guys.
Well, we're glad you're back. We hope this show will kind of revive you. I thought you were going to say you were in the outback or something, eating alligators or something. I didn't know.
Oh, that's just normal. That's just normal everyday life.
It's just every day,
yeah.
shrimps on the barbie and the whole thing. And my marvelous co-host and good friend Nullus, how are you today, sir?
I'm doing well. Hello, Donald. Hello, James, and hello to the audience.
Well, there's so much to say about James, but I think it would be better if James shared that information. So if you could just get straight into who you are. Of course, there's going to be a lot of people in our sphere, in the white identity political sphere, that watch the show, and many, of course, who know who you are. But let's think about the new people and, let them know the full range of stuff that you do, James.
Okay, great. Well, I'm James, and I was born in Australia from a predominantly Irish background. My ancestors in recent generations were scattered due to the wars and found themselves in India, and then eventually found themselves in Australia. And so I'm a first generation Australian-born Irishman, and it's taken me a while to come to that identity, because I sort of always grew up just believing I was Australian as anyone else, because I have the accent, because I was educated here, because I'm white.
Yeah.
And anyone can be Australian, right? You just show up and you're Australian. So it's taken me, up until about 30 to start to connect with my true identity in the ancestral sense. And that's been a hell of a ride, because I started podcasting 4 years ago out of 20 years of being a professional musician and working in the music industry as an entertainer, being a singer, performing at weddings and parties and pubs and clubs, and
Sure.
Really just sort of feeding in my own way the degeneracy of our culture, and feeding myself from it, because there's such a market for music as a pleasure item and as an entertainment item. But music was always very important to me, and spirituality was always of interest to me, as well as politics being of curiosity to me. But it took me until I was about 30 to start really looking at things with a clean slate, because I had so much programming put into me culturally by the globo homo overlords who educated me, that it really was quite, once I started taking the red pills, as they say, which began with an honest examination of feminism. Once I started to realize that feminism wasn't a force for good in the world,
Sure.
then that kind of led me down the rabbit hole. And I started podcasting because I realized that we were sort of swimming in a sea of lies.
Yes.
And there was some truth to be discovered if we were willing to be brave and honest about it. And I said, all right, well, I will. I put my hand up. And so I started a podcast called The Rational Rise on YouTube with a couple of atheist mates. And I was, at that stage, I was getting pretty on board the atheist message, because my first red pills had been given to me by Stefan Molyneux, and that led me to Ayn Rand and reading her work. And it was all very inspiring and encouraging, and helped me to, I guess, in a way, feel like I was part of something important. But that only led me so far. What it did do was it led me into the community of libertarians as I was podcasting more.
Sure.
And I was very, very warmly welcomed by the libertarians, and I started getting invited to speaking events in Australia here, and I spoke at a couple of libertarian conferences. And on that journey, I also, in the pursuit of truth, I returned to my childhood faith in Jesus, and that was something I'd walked away from for a long time. My parents had, as a child, due to the failings of humans and due to the failings of the church,
Right.
they had become embittered about Christianity,
Right.
and they walked away from it. While I was a child old enough to remember it, I remember them sitting me down at the table and saying, "We don't believe anymore, and we're leaving the church."
Wow.
But
It's heavy.
But it was heavy, and I felt the heaviness of it at the time. But they also said to me, and God bless them for this, they said, "But we will respect your choice." It's a lot to put on an 8-year-old.
I was going to say, how old were you when that happened? That's
I was
crazy.
8, yeah, but they gave me the choice, and I knew in my gut instantly. And I very soon after that declaration from them, I made my own declaration, which was, baptize me. I want to be baptized. They didn't baptize me as a baby like they did my sister, because they had become more Protestant, less Catholic, which my mum came from a Catholic background, and they also, I guess, were less strong in their faith, so they wanted to, leave it to me to choose. But at 8, I was just like, no, Jesus is my guy. Even if he's not yours, he's mine. So I chose Jesus. But, the truth is, boys follow their fathers. And since I've become a father of sons, I see how much they will believe anything I tell them. They will do anything. They will assume my politics. They will assume my beliefs until they're old enough to go their own way, if they need to go their own way. Right. And if I lead them the right way, then we can share those values all the way through our lives. And that's my hope. That I'm leading them the right way. But my father didn't lead me spiritually. He really went the wrong way, and I knew that at 8, and I could see, and I saw the fruits of it through the rest of my childhood, that there was something missing there for my dad, and that led me into the world. The world was right there, ready to scoop me up and make me a good little feminist, atheist NPC. And make me, sympathetic to communism, and make me think that people like Leon Trotsky were great heroes, and all this kind of nonsense that they put into our heads.
Sure.
And so I had to, actively deprogram and reprogram myself as a man. Wow. And it was really becoming a father that helped me see that I needed to do that. That my father had let me down in a couple of ways, not in every way. He's still been a great father in lots of ways. He taught me a lot about masculinity, which is a rare commodity these days in fathers. And but he didn't lead me spiritually properly. So I found my own way. And so in the midst of all of this sort of libertarian atheist podcasting, I had a road to Damascus moment. I had a spiritual awakening that I couldn't deny, and it led me to opening up the Bible and starting to read about church history, and starting to read about different theological perspectives. And it led me to start praying, as goofy as it felt. At the beginning, I started doing it because I knew I needed God, and that he was missing for me.
I cannot imagine a life without prayer, or not having any connection to God at all. That's nightmarish to me. So
yeah, well, and it was, and it really, the fruits of it were clear. And there's actually that scripture that I think was the little earworm that changed me. Was I'm in my recording studio here in the rainforest on 80 acres of paradise that I've been so blessed to be living on with 3 generations of my family here on the one property, and my father-in-law let me build my own studio. So I spent a year putting this massive recording studio together, freestanding shed that inside is now just like an epic library gym recording studio.
Sweet.
That I get to share with my sons. It is. It's such a great place. But as I had a whole bunch of friends come in and sort of do a few days with me of building, which was great. Really good. It's a good thing to do for men to build stuff together. It's a great way to bond.
True.
And one of my devout Christian friends came up and stayed a few days, and he helped me put and we the whole time. And I was sort of right in the atheist milieu at that time. And he's been a lifelong, well, not lifelong, he's been a born again Christian for a very long time.
Oh, okay.
And the thing that he said to me that really struck me deeply and stayed with me was he quoted the scripture that says, "You'll know the tree by its fruit." And when I started to examine the fruits of my life and the fruits of my decisions, particularly earlier on when I was, pursuing a hedonistic lifestyle, chasing tail more than chasing truth, rock and roll and parties and drugs and orgies and all kinds of debauchery, it was really bad fruit, and it led me down really dark paths, and so I extricated myself from that life by virtue of finding a really good wife, a really good woman, and walking away from it. But then with that wholesome, fresh start of beginning a family, which is something I always knew I wanted. Then came the question of, how will I lead
my family, and what will I
Sure.
teach my sons?
Sure.
And so at this point, I was looking at the fruits of my life in atheism and libertarianism, and sort of again seeing something missing. And I can tell you that once I began a prayer life and began seeking God, and I still have a long way to go, in my piety and in my surrender to God, but it's something I'm working at.
Mhm.
And the more I surrender to God's will and trying to live as I belong to Him rather than to myself, the sweeter the fruits of life have become.
Wow.
And so that's something I'm really proud to be giving to my sons confidently. My son is 9 now, and I've been a Christian again for about 3 years, I think. And so he doesn't remember his life before believing in Jesus.
Wow.
He doesn't have memories of that, but he believes. He's the most Christian person in my world. He's a devout believer, and he knows the Bible better than I do, and he polices me and helps me to be a better Christian as well.
Wow.
So I feel great that I'm giving that to my sons and repairing that breakage, because my ancestors have been Christian forever. For 2,000 years, nigh on, for a long time, however long it took for, I think, a few hundred years for the message of Jesus to reach Ireland.
Ireland.
That my ancestors have been Christian. And my grandfather, who was a very influential force in my life, he was a lot older than he had my father quite late in life, in his 50s, I think. And so he was very elderly, but I grew up with him, and he was a deeply Christian man, unwavering in his faith. He never pushed it on anyone, but he was just there, rock solid. And when I look at, what kind of man I want to be, he was always coming up in my mind and in my heart as the archetype I would choose to emulate of the kind of quality of man I want to be. So I had that influence.
Yeah.
The faith was broken for one generation in my father, but I've restored it, and I feel like I've done my part to piece back together the logos of my lineage.
Powerful story, very deeply inspiring. There's quite a lot to say there. I don't know if Nullus wants to respond just a bit.
All I want to say is that I love the term, the logos of my lineage.
Yeah, that rolled off the tongue quite spontaneously.
That's your next song, James.
No, it's a profound statement, because it does combine a lot of elements that we're trying to incorporate into our identities. The logos of our lineage, who we are.
Yes. Yeah.
It plugs
and
in very
really,
much.
my father was one of those boomers, who was conned into believing that we're disparate, atomized individuals, and that we are to pursue happiness and joy and pleasure in life, and that's a trap. That's a satanic trap.
It is.
And I've come to realize the fruits of that are bitter ones. And my father, the happy ending, I suppose, for him, he's still alive, but he's returned to a spiritual pursuit in his later life very much, and he's on his own path. It's a different one to me, but he's seeking truth, and he's seeking God in his own way. And so I'm grateful that that's happened, and I still pray that he'll return to Jesus one day, even if it's in his last breath. But yeah, like without that, my life wasn't one that I would want to give to my children. I would not want my children to repeat the first 20 years of my life. I want to spare them the pain and the suffering and the hopelessness, the nihilism, the sickness of pleasure seeking. It's a real sickness.
Yeah.
Well, we want to let people know more about you as a musician as well. There's very much to unpack today on the show. So let me first kind of back up a little, though, and ask you, where would you place yourself on the map of right-wing content producers out there? Like some of the guests you've had on your show, or topics that you find interesting for your show, your political positions, that kind of thing.
Sure. Well, it's a tricky one. Actually, that political compass test that's quite popular. I did that right at the start. It was one of the first podcasts I did, and I sort of came up as a right-leaning centrist libertarian at that point. And then I did it again recently and answered it as honestly as I could. And I don't actually like the questions, and I don't think it's a very good metric, but it's an interesting one to see the change over time, because I ended up coming up more left-leaning authoritarian after 4 years. And I'm not sure that's right, but in terms of, you know, whose ideas and what sort of values I've arrived at, I call myself a Christian nationalist. And that doesn't mean that that I think that if we're all Christian, we're all of the same nation. That it means that I'm a nationalist who believes in blood and soil, and that Christ is the supreme truth who transcends all nations, and that all nations would thrive under Jesus Christ as our King, and that God created us and the nations to be diverse and unique, and that each of them are precious and deserve their own place and their own time to develop at their own rate, and that it's this collision of all of these races and nations together that's causing so much pain and conflict and destruction of all kinds of capital, spiritual capital, cultural capital, genetic capital. It's all being diminished and destroyed because we've rejected God's order, which I believe is the nations. So in a nutshell, I'm a Christian nationalist, but it's been a ride getting there. And in terms of my advocacy, you know, the person I've found most inspirational in recent times has been Jason from No White Guilt. And, you know, I've had a couple of conversations with him, and I've found his work to be very powerful, because it's really just reframing the conversation to be about, it's okay for us to be positive about who we are. And that's not at anyone else's expense. And, you know, I've just been chatting today with people on Twitter about Japan. You know, Japan's a nation that my family's had 3 generations of strange and deep connection with. And I've traveled in Japan several times, and I deeply love that people. But I've never for a moment thought that it's my people, or that I could become Japanese. You know, even though I've learned from them, I've studied martial arts in Japan and competed there. And it's still a profoundly inspiring culture to me, but it's not my culture. I lived
in Japan for a year. I can definitely understand.
Yeah. And so when I started to realize that, then I started asking the question, well, who are my people? What is my culture? And so in recent years, it's been great to reconnect with my Irish ancestry, to actually do my family tree up and see some of the people who I've descended from, or some of my sort of distant cousins through history and what they've achieved, to understand the way we've been scattered and the harm that's been done to my people in that sense. And then again, to give my sons that identity, to say, you know, you're not 100% Irish, but your father is from an Irish line and your name is Irish, and so we are Irish. And just to lock in with that and truthfully identify with that culture and that history, just to say that that's our people, has been so empowering for me and for my sons, you know, to belong to something.
Right. My father used to always tell me, you know, no matter what anyone says, you're 100% Irish. And he had like massive Irish pride. I'm not 100% Irish, Scottish, French, and English, but like
we're all mongrels. We're all mongrels after the 20th century.
It's just a beautiful thing, though. I don't know. That's quite nice. So who would you say are some of the highlights of the people that you've had on your show, and you know what that meant to you?
Well, my thing is, you know, I love having conversations, and I love challenging ideas. Yeah. And so I'm never the kind of person who's like, oh, I wouldn't talk to them. They're a racist, or they're a commie, or any of that. It's like, if somebody can have a civil conversation, I'm up for it. So I've interviewed so many interesting and controversial people. Wow. Like Blair Cottrell, who's sort of public enemy #1 in Australia because he's an outright nationalist advocate. A white nationalist, yeah, exactly. We've had I've had our only nationalist, truly nationalist senator come on for an interview as well, but he got ousted, unfortunately. And then I've talked to, I've had a lot of conversations with Kurt Doolittle from the Proprietarian movement. spoken with Mark Collette and Jason and Jared George and who else? I've even interviewed Gavin McInnes. That was a good hoot.
I can imagine. Yeah.
So I've had I love all of it. But I guess, the people who I've connected with the most deeply end up becoming partners with me in something. We end up creating stuff together. So there's a guy called Mike Lowry who I do a bi-weekly live stream called Champions of the Light with, which is sort of tied into the online community that I've built called Champions of the Light.
Yeah, the link is below the show, and it's also at your Twitter, people, just so they know where to find it.
Great, thank you. And Mike's become my best mate in very short order, and we just love each other and we love Jesus together, and we're coming from different vectors in some ways, but we're all about just spreading white Christian positivity, and encouraging people to just be okay with who they are and love their people and love their neighbor and love their enemy, and trust that we have God at our backs. So it's hard to pick favorites, but as I said, Jason has been particularly inspirational to me simply because he's changed the conversation in a way where they can't. Right. I can't if I speak with the lexicon of going free to the best of my ability, I can never again doubt that I'm on the side of good here. That I'm and there was doubt for a while as I was moving away from libertarianism and civic nationalism, which is sort of kind of part of that movement, and moving towards genuine nationalism. So many people get hostile when you start making that transition. So many people start saying, you're stepping off the plantation, you're going down the racist path. You shouldn't ask those questions. You should never doubt the story of history we were told about Germany in World War II or any of this. Like, you should not ask these questions. And if somebody tells me I shouldn't talk to someone or I shouldn't ask a particular question, you can bet your ass I'm going to do it.
That's the way to go.
Yeah. So I would flag Jason as a big inspiration just because of it, the positivity. White positivity, I think, is the right frame.
Right. For our listeners, Jason Kuna, NoWhiteGuilt.com. He is a giant among men, and he's just getting started. What he's done for the white positive sphere is profound. And that's the team you want to get on. I mean, I just can't say enough good about him and Jared George. I adore both of them. We have so much to thank them for. And like I said, there's so much more to come. So I think we all owe some thanks to them for laying some groundwork and keeping the fire going underneath us and pushing us forward. And the relentless energy that Jason has is a huge inspiration too. That guy's just like perpetually streaming and just full of vigor. Yeah, I'm hoping he can bottle that so I can buy some, because I really need a couple of that. But I think he has in his books. There you go. That's a good point. Nullus, did you want to chime in a little bit?
Yeah, I actually want to. I addressed this in one of my episodes of Conversation with the Wind, where the title was Love is Will to Power. And what I meant by that was that love and faith are forces of true will to power. Love of God and respecting the divine absolute. Love of one's self and not submitting to the nihilism of materialism. Love of family and nation to provide strength through our continued struggles, and love of our brethren to show wisdom. And I think that when we transfer and translate all of this energy into a positive and define it as love, then it becomes a lot more salient, and it becomes something that we can use as a motivator for anyone who wants to understand what it is, who they are, and what it is they want to achieve. And I maybe should also add, I'm a cradle Catholic, and my journey when I was very young, I was very devout. And then over the course of the decades, I kind of lost my connection to God. And there was one point in my life where I spoke with a priest and I told them that I just feel very distant from God. It's not that I don't believe, and it's not that I don't think that that's the right path, but it's just that I personally, spiritually, I felt very distant from God. So he told me that I have to take my journey. I have to go through that process to understand what it is. And a part of that process is to pray, to go to Mass, to really immerse yourself in that relationship. And at the same time, I can relate with James on many levels. I'm also first generation. My parents fled Hungary after the Hungarian Revolution of '56, so I'm the first generation that was born in the United States. And so in my case, I also, and this is also an ongoing theme, I guess, where I have, you could say, one foot in the United States and one foot in Europe, and I have a very strong connection with my heritage. So I grew up speaking the language. I grew up speaking Hungarian. I grew up in that culture, even though it was, you could say, in the diaspora and or in exile at the time, right? Because at that time it was considered more of an exile, an immigration, or I guess you could call it the immigrant community. Suffice it to say, for me, nationalism was always present. So the sense of national identity was something I grew up with, and I'm very fortunate to have this. Faith was also something I grew up with. It was always there. It was always there to guide me, even in moments and in the years where I grew distant from God. It was still there as a theme, as a running theme, and I knew that at any point in time, when I was ready, I knew where I had to go. And so for me, it was fairly easy, fortunately, in that sense. But the path itself is not easy. So I can relate to what you said, James, about your path being, to piety it's not an easy path. And there's a lot to atone for, and not in the sense of making up to, becoming critical of others, but more of being critical of yourself, and to look in the mirror and say, yes, you have to be honest with yourself about your behavior, about your personal weaknesses, and all these different issues. So just maybe to cap it off, for me, nationalism is a symbiotic relationship with faith. I can't see a difference. I cannot see a separation between my nationalism, my national identity, and my faith. And we should not define these as prioritize these. We should not say that one is more important than the other. What we should really say is that they're symbiotic, they belong to each other, and what we should do is define what these are, because they're different types of love, right? You have, the different the C.S. Lewis 4 different kinds of love that he speaks of, and I think that's actually a very good way of defining it. The storge, the empathy bond, the philia, the friend bond, the eros, the romantic love, and the agape, the unconditional divine love of God, right, or in Christ. So I think that in all of these, you have a very interesting combination that we're working on. So I'm very happy to hear everything that you said, and I'm actually my hat's off to you for making all of these efforts. It's not an easy journey. I'll be the first to admit it.
And part of what makes it difficult, thank you for saying that, part of what makes it difficult, as I'm sure you and many of your listeners have experienced, is the hostility that you receive when you start to ask these questions publicly, or you start to bring these topics up. People are so deeply programmed to think that any white people having pride or even curiosity sometimes in their own heritage as being uniquely derived from a specific people in a specific place over time, through specific troubles and struggles over many generations, that somehow that means you hate other people. And they really want to get that idea into your head. The media is constantly pummeling it, that any white nationalism is a white supremacy movement, right, and a hatred of all people of color. Even the term people of color is one of the most anti-white. It's probably the most anti-white term created, because it's like anyone who's not white is part of our club. So that's a white hatred term, and it only exists to isolate and demonize white people. Yeah. And when you start saying these things, people get really hostile. And I've lost a lot of friendships. I've had people really turn on me. I've had people threaten me with violence over these ideas. Wow. And all the while, I've been checking my heart. Do I hate? Am I what they say I am? Yeah. And I'm not. And I don't. I don't hate any man. I don't even hate my enemy. I pity them because they're going to lose. Yeah. But I like that. But I don't hate them.
we are, and again, we will win. That's I always like to say that we will win.
Yep. No doubt.
Yeah, God wills it.
Beautifully said. So you have a new album coming out, and we're featuring some of it and the album art on this show. So we thank you, first of all, to allow us to do that. But I'm very curious about your creative process and how your faith ties into that. So when you're writing music, or conceiving of an album and the whole themes, etc., how does it all work out? And earlier, before the show, we were discussing how these particular songs relate to Imperium art specifically. So that's a giant question, but if you could kind of hack away at that.
Well, I think we can get to the specific songs probably a little later, but in terms of my process and my faith, this is my fourth solo studio album. It'd probably be about the 20th album that I've produced, because I've worked with a lot of other artists and in bands over the years. But it's my fourth album under my name, James Fox Higgins. Okay. It's my first Christian album. It's my first album of faith. You know, my previous three albums were intellectual and creative explorations on different themes, mostly kind of shallow party music, a few personal feelsy love songs or songs of loss and sadness, you know, typical kind of pop music stuff. Sure. From the soul, under the soul music kind of umbrella has always been my interest. And this album has been entirely different as a process, like radically different to every other one that I worked on. So all the previous albums, as I was sort of green and learning my craft over the years, a lot of the time I would sit down and I'd say, I need to write a song. And I would either just kind of hack away at the keyboard or the guitar until I found a chord progression that I liked. And then I'd sort of try to write some lyrics and melody that fit to that. And it was it's sort of like building a Lego castle, you know, it was a construction process. Yeah. It was very cold and intellectual a lot of the time, but sometimes it ended up working out well, especially when I brought other people involved and you get that creative stew going with other creative minds and hearts involved.
It's very helpful.
And I'm still proud of the work that I did, but you know, seeing how the process has changed over time has been powerful, because this album, you know, I literally, when I had my most profound moment of undeniable acceptance of the existence of God and his presence in my life and his desire for me to serve him, I got down on my knees and I said, my voice is yours, Lord, do with it as you will. And then it's been years since that I've been not forcing music to come out of me like I used to. I've been sort of just patiently waiting for God to use me. And then last year, my family and I moved out west. We live a bit closer to the east coast of Australia now, but we moved to a city out west, in the middle of more in the middle of this side of Australia. And I when we planned to move back, it was a 6-hour drive back to where we come from, and we started to sort of put down our roots again back home. And as part of that, I started doing gigs again on the coast. So I'd go off every other weekend and do like 4 gigs in a row and then come back. So I'd have these like 6-hour drives through the Australian outback. Wow. On my own. And it was on these drives that I'd listen to podcasts. I'd listen to not so much music, it was mostly podcasts, but I'd be sort of opening my mind and my heart to different challenging ideas, as I always do. And then at some point, inspiration would just hit me, and I'd pause the podcast and I'd open the sound recorder and I'd just start singing. Yeah. And no joke, at least 8 of these 12 songs just came out of me in one go. Like lyrics, melody, I could hear the whole orchestration, I could hear everything. Magical. Just came through me, all for the glory of God. Yeah. And I knew this was something special. You know, I knew this was, I'm a real musician now because God is my collaborator. This is really happening, you know? And so I didn't rush it. I kept these voice recordings, and in fact, my phone died at one point and I lost, I think 4 of them.
Oh no.
And I was but I didn't panic. You know, in the past, I've had, as many creatives will relate to, you have those moments where your hard drive just sort of bursts into flames or whatever, and you lose all your work, and you're devastated for a couple of. I didn't let myself get devastated. I was like, no, God's got these songs. These are from God, you know. So they'll be back. And so when I was ready, when I felt in the right zone, I just did it again. I just hit record, and no joke, exactly the same songs were there, same lyrics. I could hear everything still. And so I took these voice recordings that if I played them to you, you'd hear them. You wouldn't hear what I'm hearing, but in the background, I can hear what they should have become. But in December, next month, you guys will, and the ones that we play on this show, you will hear what they've become. And I guarantee you they are what was in my mind at the start. That's the first time that's ever happened, because every other album has ended up in a different shape than I originally envisioned, because I either didn't have the skills to achieve what I wanted to, which I do now, or they weren't truly inspired. They were Lego castles, they weren't real art. But these ones, they haven't. It's been like, it's like that analogy. I forget who said it. Maybe it was Michelangelo. We'll say it's Michelangelo just for for the sake of it.
Somebody else.
It's the stripping. The sculpture is already there. You're just stripping away the excess. Sure. It's kind of like that with this. The songs were already there. I'm just manifesting them. Right. I'm not creating them. I'm just manifesting them.
Chipping away the rock around it. Yeah. You used the term, it's not real art, just a moment ago. And that really set off kind of not a red flag, but some kind of a flag that said, like, well, here it sounds like what you're saying is that real art comes from something deeply inspired, and certainly from you, from God. So is that a fair thing to say?
Yeah, well, I would say true creation comes from the highest creator, doesn't it? And I think God made us to be co-creators with him.
I agree.
With him, and it's where I've been railing against him and trying to be so clever on my own that I've failed to produce work that had any impact, and I've already sold more copies of this album than of any other album I've produced before it's even been released, and there's power in this project. Like, God is in this, and I've trusted that the whole way and been patient enough to spend 5 years waiting for the songs and then developing the songs, and then 2020 hit, COVID hit, and I lost all my gigs. I had a full calendar of gigs for the year, and it all got wiped clean. And I had this moment of, this could break me and my family. Wow. What am I going to do? I'm going to use this time to do God's work and get this album done. So I started a crowdfunding campaign back in May, and in 2 months we raised the money I needed to produce the album. And then I've spent the last 6 months just gunning for it, and we're in the final stages now of mixing and mastering, and it's mind blowing. Like I can say with all humility that this is a mind blowing album. This is really powerful, and everyone who's been involved with it, the visual artist who's designed the cover art, his name's Manuel Guzman. He goes by Lolo. Amazing Christian artist, and my best friend who's not Christian, but he's right with us on all of these spiritual, philosophical, and political ideas. He and I really walked through this together out of the leftist music industry into our own track against all odds, and he's been mixing and mastering it for me, and he's just thrown his heart and soul into this, and he's gone, and he's a hard to impress guy, and he's meticulous. But he's really complimented me on how important and powerful this particular work of art is. So I'm really excited to present it, because it's I mean, the title is Logos Rising, and that's exactly what it is. It's happening in me, it's happening in you guys, it's happening in your audience, it's happening all over the world, and our enemies who currently rule over us are panicking because they see Logos is rising and we're going to win. So this album, my hope for this album is that it's going to be inspirational, especially over the next year for people of Europe, for Americans.
We're happy to promote it for you,
brothers and sisters, and for the European bio.
For sure. There's so much to say. I'm really amazed at that whole story, and I can't wait to hear more. But there's a lot of other questions, so we're going to jump around a little bit. I wanted to ask you also what you think, is Christianity and nationalism compatible? What are the differences? What are the connections? And through answering this, you can, of course, answer your opinions or your thoughts, what it means to you. But what would you say to someone who's not Christian, who maybe thinks, oh, the two don't go together? What would be the case for that?
Right. Yeah. Well, it's a tricky one, because you get hostility from both ends. I get a lot of Christians who are, churchians. They're the fully cucked civic nationalist types.
Pacifists,
You know,
basically.
yeah, and most of them are Protestant, not surprisingly. You know, and they're not really into it, and they deny the nations, even though the Bible has something like 600 references to the nations. They deny the existence of them, at least for white people. You know, it's fine for everyone else, especially those Jews. They're allowed to have their nation. They're allowed to be a very special nation.
Sure.
And then, of course, you get a lot of non-Christians in our political sphere who are, you know, really suspicious of Christianity as a sort of a Jewish Trojan horse into Europe.
Right.
I don't have answers to all of these things, but my faith is very real, and I know that for me, the ultimate good in my life and the sweetest fruit of my life is family. And you know, I didn't have a perfect home to grow up in. My parents ended up divorcing, and that was a tragedy. But it is what it is, and it was a lesson for me, and it's not going to happen to me. You know, I've got my wife for life. I've got my sons. We might make more babies in the future. We're definitely both more keen than ever to keep breeding. You know, so we're going to see what we can do. But family is the sweetest fruit of life. Yeah. And why is that? Well, that's how God made us. In fact, that's what God made us to do. The very first commandment was be fruitful and multiply. Yeah. You know, and so when you start to think about family, what is family? It's not just that we live together under a roof and we share the same ideas. It's actually that we are of the same material. Yeah. And I've taken the material of this woman who I adore and filled it with my material and produced two new human beings who are a combination of us.
It's amazing.
And that goes way beyond just our little nuclear family. It goes beyond that because there are others out there. I mean, I have my cousins, I have my sister, you know, I have my direct relatives. But when I start to look at my family tree, you just go back a few generations and you see you got tens of thousands of people living who are your relatives. Right. And then go back a few more generations, you've got hundreds of thousands of people. A few more, you've got millions of people alive who you share grandfathers with. That's crazy. Family.
Right.
And so that's what the nation is. The nation is just family writ large. And absolutely that is compatible with Christianity because it's God's natural order. And it's not to say that we exclude or hate people who are not part of our family, but it's pretty clear that I am in no way related to anyone from sub-Saharan Africa. You know, there's just no connection there genetically. I can appreciate aspects of their culture. I've got friends who are from that part of the world, and I'm fascinated by where they come from, and I encourage them to love their people and love their family and be part of that. We can all do that. None of it has to be at each other's expense. Right. But if you know, the denial of family writ large leads us to the nuclear family in the 20th century, which led us to the atomized individual, which is the Trojan horse of our destruction as nations.
I wonder if Nullus can chime in on that. That's a pretty profound question, the compatibility of Christianity with nationalism.
Of course. I mean, again, I'm going to reference something here that I've addressed in another, or in the Conversations with the Wind podcast. So we talked about these different kinds of love. And when we take these various forms of love, then we have to consider that it's not a question of prioritization. It's a question of finding harmony with these different kinds of love. And if we do that, then we start to understand that it's a logical flow, meaning without God, we have no overarching morality, and our devotion to a higher purpose becomes materialistic. And if you take the next level and you say materialistic and other forms of earthly love without divine morality, it's malleable, it's easily corruptible, because man is corruptible and man is malleable and weak. So
and I guess the ultimate form of materialism, right, is the belief that because I end at the boundary of my skin, that I have no connection to other people. You know, that my matter is contained in this body. And so if that's all I am and there's no connection to anyone else, then I am a truly atomized individual. And then I have to live for myself. And that's the devil's work.
That's exactly. So we have to balance this, but this is not a repudiation of nationalism. It's not a repudiation of race. And I think that this is where there's a disconnect, because we just need to understand that if we don't love ourselves, if we don't love our family, if we have no confidence in who we are, then we can't really realize the true nature of love that we share for others, or the love that we express towards our own people. So we have to understand that this is not a question of what's better or what's worse, whether nationalism is an idolatrous kind of extremism. And I think that, many Christians get this wrong. For as much as I respect E. Michael Jones, I feel that he does get this wrong in terms of not understanding the larger connection of the ethnos. And so
well, actually, I interviewed E. Michael Jones a few months ago, and it's been one of my more popular ones. And afterwards, Dave Riley called me up and he said, "We got to do that again, because I've never heard the doctor pause for thought so much on the question of race as when you started challenging him." Because I challenged him when he started sort of talking about identity as being malleable and being in that sort of civic nationalist frame. And I could see cognitive dissonance in him, because he has a strong connection to his German ancestry as well as his Irish ancestry, but he's American. He's born and raised in America. And so he faces the same kind of confusion that we all do in this modern world where we've all been shaken up. But it's hard to be honest about those things for everyone, especially when there are these sort of spiritual questions of, is it idolatrous? And I think there are nationalists out there who do take it to an idolatrous level. They do go too far with it.
Well, you can go too far with religion and it becomes a cult. So you really have to be careful about how you weigh the priorities and how you focus on these priorities. Faith should not be a replacement for addiction, for example. Faith should be a release from addiction. Little things like this are very important points. Same with nationalism. My nationalism is rock solid. My faith is also, my faith is rock solid. Of course, my journey is questionable right now. I'm still working on it. But what I'm trying to get at is that once we understand this relationship with God's moral divinity, then we start to open our hearts to, an extremely important task that starts with loving ourselves in the sense, of course, not narcissistically loving ourselves, but learning to accept ourselves, because again, the first step to redemption is to forgive yourself. And so you have to love yourself in order to forgive yourself. And
who are you to not love yourself if the creator God of the universe loves you?
That's correct.
That's the place to come back to for me often is, I often have sort of periods of self-loathing on some level, and I don't let it rule me, but it's there because I have my scars and I've defiled myself in many ways over the years. But returning to that idea that actually it's not up to me. My heavenly Father loves me. Who am I to hate myself if he loves me?
That's exactly it. And so when you learn to love yourself in a positive way, then you start loving your family, your brothers and sisters. You start loving your nation in a much more wholesome way. So all of this is connected, and we can't lose ourselves. And because let me rephrase that. There's always a chance that we lose ourselves in something. And so that's why we need some kind of a higher purpose that's greater than ourselves, something that ties us all together, brings us all together in a positive way. But the only way we can do that is through that individual journey of understanding yourself and loving your family. Now, who's your family? Your family is your immediate family, your extended family, your nation, your race. These are all your families. And there's different levels of love. I mean, obviously, you're going to love your sons more than you're going to love your neighbor's sons. That doesn't mean that you hate your neighbor's sons, and it also doesn't mean that you wouldn't. Right, and it also doesn't mean that you wouldn't help your neighbor or his sons if they needed your help. But what it does mean is that you will not love your neighbor to spite yourself.
Mm-hmm. See,
Right,
this,
and that's where so much Christianity goes astray. Goes off course, where we see the churchian movement, the modern sort of hollow Protestant Christianity that is destroying its own nations out of a desire to virtue signal that we don't hate other nations, and it's so wrong.
pathological altruism, I believe, is what they
Exactly.
call
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
You're making some really, really profound points that plug into the Imperium Art Project, and something that I think I'd like to take an opportunity to have all the listeners and everyone really in our political sphere to think through, and that is to start with forgiving yourself and loving yourself, and let that be the nucleus from which our healing and our growth, our power and our prosperity expands outward. I think that very many of us in the white identity sphere have kind of come to terms that maybe we have enough pride and strength to figure it out and go forward, but very many of us don't. The normies, people outside our sphere, are still laboring under the hypnosis of the anti-white agenda that's around us all the time. And, I think maybe the message of self-love is going to be one of the most important messages coming out of Imperium art of any kind. So that actually segues a little bit into my next question. I wanted to ask you, what are some of your insights and critiques of the white identity political sphere? You've been in the scene for a while, a lot of people, and I'm not talking about naming names or anything of that nature, but more about, what do you think is happening in the movement now, and where should it go?
Right. Well, the main thing that troubles me, and I try to be a bulwark against it as much as I can, is where I see the divisions, especially along spiritual lines, and it's this particular battle that seems to keep coming up, at least in conversation, between people who are returning to what they believe are their national pagan roots in Europe, being very hostile and suspicious towards Christians, and keeping these divisions between us. And really what I'm trying to facilitate, especially with Champions of the Light, which is a new social network that I've built from scratch specifically for this purpose, is to create a white positive community with Christ at its center that welcomes all who are allies. And you don't have to be a believer. You're just not allowed to blaspheme on our social network, and but bringing us together, even with our differences, to say, well, there's something higher that we all can agree on and aspire to and find alliance in, and it's so I see a lot of and to be honest, they're not key figures in the movement. They're keyboard warriors, but a lot of noise, subversive noise against people like me for, in their perception, cucking to a Jewish desert cult, and creating those divisions instead of going, hey, we're actually brothers in being European. We're actually family, and just as family can disagree about things and have different perspectives and beliefs, but still love each other and get along and work together, especially against common enemies. We have to do that. So I'm really, as much as I can, I'm always trying to build bridges. And, like, for instance, a lot of people really turned on Kurt Doolittle and the Proprietarian movement after July 4th.
Yeah.
I understand why.
Yeah.
But it went to such a hostile extreme that it threw the baby out with the bathwater. It threw out all of the good ideas that Kurt has been working on. That may not be the most pertinent ideas for right now, but they're going to be needed in the future. And so keeping these bridges up, is really important. So I see myself as a bridge builder in this broader community, just trying to create a space and a feeling of brotherly love between all of these groups. Jason, who we've talked about already, he went off at Kurt. And again, I understand why, but I think what the problem with Proprietarianism is that it's a little bit of a cart before horse situation. They've written a new system of law, to ascertain truth scientifically. Right. That's so important. It's so important for the future of our people. But that's not the fight we're in right now. Right. We've got to get out of the gulag first. So it's Jason's work, and that sort of white positivity, reprogramming ourselves to love ourselves and love our family and love our nations and our race. That's the work we need to do right now. But if we don't have those other tools down the line, we're screwed. We can't preserve it and sustain it. So I'm just, as much as I can, trying to, do away with the naysaying commenters and just find these thought leaders who may not agree with each other or feel like they're coming from the same place, and point out to them and show them why they are brothers and allies and why they need to work together. So that's my main critique, is there's too much division when we need to be coming together, even if we disagree.
Yeah. I look at it like kind of the mission comes first versus cult of personality. And there's, how can I say, Christianity is just as much a part of the European history as indigenous religions before it. So, I'm not to tell anybody what to think or feel or what their journey is, but both of these things are in our historic timeline. They are in our identity. So it seems like, okay, let's just start there and then let's come together, because I'm very much for the mission comes first. We must have some level of agreed upon unity as a movement and as a people in order to prevail. And then once we get our footing and we take back our lands and we have, in a sense, the freedom we need to have people to do whatever they'll do, then that's fine. But right now I feel the more division we have within ourselves, the more we're throwing a bone to our enemies. So I'm with you on that for sure. Do you have any thoughts on this, Nullus?
Yeah, I actually want to make a point of this to say that I fully agree with both of you. Our project here on Imperium Art is about building bridges, finding that overarching theme where we can all work together, find each other, and learn from each other, grow together, and find a means to defend ourselves against this onslaught of both external attacks and also internal subversions. And so I have a lot of respect for people of many different faiths and backgrounds in our sphere. And so I don't want to give the false impression that, my faith is very solid. I would wish everyone would agree with me, but I also know that that's not going to always happen. And so what I try to always do also in the podcast, the Poetry Cast, is also just express my experience. What is it that I know? What is it that I can share with everyone? And through that, I hope that people will find their truths. And so just to give you a good example, when we're talking about paganism, and I bring this, I think I brought this topic up during our last conversation as well. There was the Blessed Lady in Hungarian tradition. And the Blessed Lady was a pagan goddess who was the goddess of birth and the goddess of death. So she would guide you into life and she would guide you into death, into the afterlife. And when the Hungarians became Christianized, then this concept of the Blessed Lady, in Hungarian it's called the Boldog Asszony, this became the symbol of the Virgin Mary. And so over the centuries, this evolved. And so you still have a very strong tradition in Hungary of venerating the Virgin Mother, or the Boldog Asszony, and it's still called that after 1,000 years. And so the pagan tradition has very easily transferred into the Christian tradition. And now I'm not really talking about the verbal or the literal veneration of the Virgin Mary is equal to the pagan goddess, but what I am talking about is the hope that it presents to the people. And so you have a situation now where there are many, many hymns, but there's one very famous hymn, and this is called Our Blessed Lady, Our Mother. It's a Hungarian religious hymn. But if anyone plays that song in Hungary, regardless of your background, whether you're Protestant, Catholic, pagan, or non-religious, it still evokes a very strong and deep emotion in you. And so in a way, I like to use this always as an example of how we can find an overarching theme so that we can use this as a means to work together regardless of our backgrounds and learn to respect each other, and also understand that we all belong to the same continuity regardless of what we believe today.
Mm-hmm. Continuity is a term that we use a lot when discussing Imperium art. And so I think that's another good kind of linguistic angle to throw into this, especially on the topic of creating unity. So moving forward, we also wanted to ask you, we often talk about an overarching theme to help forge stronger camaraderie among the various communities within our sphere. So what are your thoughts on this topic, big tent versus alliance? You know, just on this whole topic of unity and such. So how?
Yeah, I was pondering this one, and I actually wanted to hear your definition of the distinction between the big tent idea and the alliance idea, because to me they seem similar, but I'd like to know what the difference is for you before I answer that.
Oh, I think I can answer that one. So when we're talking about a big tent, you're basically talking about a kind of a melding of these different groups into one larger group, meaning that ultimately one idea dominates over every other idea, as opposed to an alliance where you have an understanding of the diversity. You know, it's so funny how often we use that word in Imperium.
I know, it's crazy. It's like
Yeah, well, I love diversity. I'll tell you, I love true diversity, not this
True diversity.
graying of the nations that they call diversity. The true diversity of the world is a beautiful thing.
So alliance to me means that we understand our differences, we respect each other, and we use our differences as a strength as opposed to a weakness that separates us. So I think a big tent would be more of let's say everyone being forced to agree to one overarching theme, as opposed to making the alliance the overarching theme. And so the alliance itself being that overarching theme, and then within that alliance we find common threads, we find synergies that make us stronger.
Well, I've found that the overarching theme that has actually made me able to connect with the most number of people as I practice it and preach it and see it as important to others. And this is why I guess the Proprietarian gang is kind of close to my heart, because they are, as far as I see, the main people pushing this overarching theme is reciprocity. This is something that it actually doesn't matter what your specific spiritual faith is, or even what your race is, or any of that. Reciprocity is a sort of a universal constant in our behavior that we can all agree to, and that's where we're able to put whatever differences we need to put aside, and treat each other properly and live and let live to some degree. Now we need to do a little bit more than live and let live as the white nations for now, because we're in the sort of end game of a war on us. But I sort of see the big tent. You know, I like the analogy, and I like it being a tent because tents are portable and they're changeable. You know, it's like the tabernacle. You know, we move it as we need to. And we can expand it as we need to, or shrink it as we need to, or we could set up a colony of tents side by side as we need to. So I think we do need to have that sort of flexibility, but I think reciprocity is a really powerful overarching theme that we could all get behind, where, you know, it simply says that if we respect each other's property, respect each other's beliefs, respect each other's sovereignty, you know, don't steal from each other or try to hurt each other's children or any of that stuff, then we're friends, or at least we're at peace if we're not friends, you know. And likewise, if you try to harm our children, we will reciprocate to defend. And that's what we've lost, is that willingness to reciprocate the behavior of our enemies. So something I've been saying a lot over the last few days is that, if bringing it down to something specific now, like the battle that you guys are facing right now in America, if Biden takes the White House, if he manages to pull off this theft, the reciprocal and proper response for all Trump supporters is 4 years of relentless undermining of that presidency.
Strongly.
And go further, take it up 10 notches.
Strongly agree.
Undermine them harder than they undermined you.
Oh yeah.
It's necessary. It's moral. You have every justification to do it,
Yep.
and it's reciprocal.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a massive other conversation that I would love to get into. I do frequently have that conversation with several people in my personal sphere, but it's quite fascinating. The topic of reciprocity, help me out,
Reciprocity.
reciprocity. Sorry,
Yeah.
not apparently. I'm sure. But no, that it's a what I've read of it and what I know of it, the ideas are very, very solid. And I've hated that idea that, throw the baby out with the bathwater. That's absurd. Ideas are still ideas. It doesn't matter who is saying them and whether or not they're moral or a failure or something. The idea itself stands on its own. So
That's right.
yeah, these are powerful, powerful concepts.
And the other
That
dangerous
actually,
idea that we hear a lot from, even from MAGA folk, is take the moral high road, right? Like, if we lose, we're just going to have to suck it up and cooperate with
can't
the
stand
new
that. Yeah.
administration. You hear this from the rhinos, all the fake Republicans,
Right.
and it's nonsense. It's evil, disgusting, suicidal nonsense.
Yes.
All you've had for the last 4 years, undermining and lies. And we don't have to lie, we don't have to sin
No, we don't
to win.
No.
But the truth is on our side. That's our great sword. But we do have to undermine. We do have to delegitimize in every way possible our enemies.
I would dare to say that even when Trump wins, that we still have to do that. We can't rest on our laurels.
Yeah, until they're gone, until you've completely.
It's got to be eradicated totally from Earth. That's again a very giant topic, but it is central to what Imperium art is. Imperium art is foreseeing that world where that is gone, where we have a world where we're unmolested by foreign influences and parasites and all these other problems that we have in white genocide. So,
and then if the action of our reciprocity within the European sphere is to love each other, because we love ourselves, we love our family, we love our nation, we love our race. Again, even if we're totally different, and hey, even outside of the white sphere, like we talked about Japan before, if the Japanese nationalists want to rise up and start taking back their own country, we got to get behind them. We got to support them and encourage them and inspire them and lock arms with them. It's their fight, but we can help them spiritually in a lot of ways.
Yeah, I'm totally on the same page with that. I think all nationalists everywhere should kind of reciprocate that respect, help, and assistance. So that's
and then we concentrate on our common enemy and the people who will not be reciprocal, who do not love us, who hate us, who want us dead. We turn our attention to them. It's very easy to put aside our smaller squabbles with each other.
I strongly agree. Yeah.
Yeah. I wanted to make a point of that by saying, we have to be very selective in how we forge these alliances, because not everything that shines or not everything that glitters is gold, as they say.
Yes. So let me move forward a little bit. So what are your thoughts on Nullus's essay on Imperium art? Every show we have a kind of a turning point where we ask our guests to give us their thoughts, critiques. We actually invite critique. We feel that it can't improve unless it's given rigorous analysis and critique. So go ahead.
Well, the fourth sentence on the 9th page needs one additional comma.
All right. You're right out.
So there's my critique.
Okay.
But no, we were talking about it before.
Oh, we lost you there.
Together last night. She read.
Oh, you're going in and out a little bit. You were saying your wife and you were talking about it?
Oh, sure. Yeah, my wife and I we read it together last night. She read it to me, and she's the academic among us, and we both loved it. We found it amazing, really, that you've arrived academically and intellectually at the very same essential beliefs and message as I've arrived at musically and creatively. My album tracks extremely nicely with the concepts that you lay out, and the songs that we'll share in the show demonstrate that. There was one quote where you talked about the existential location of cultural convergence, where all our respective traditions are equally celebrated, cherished, and respected. So, rather than it being a political empire, which we know has been very damaging and toxic in a lot of ways, and it's what we're seeing now as the collapse of the American empire, that's fine. That can die. We don't need that kind of empire. But to have the Imperium of our cultures, where we respect each other even in our differences, and celebrate and learn from and even absorb the best of each other's cultures over time. That's a truly beautiful thing. And my song on this album, Europa and the Bull, which is really, it's an allegory of the Phoenician princess Europa and her rape by the bull that Zeus appeared as, her kidnapping and her rape. But there's a strong analogy in there, even in the symbolism. The bull is the money. The bull is the global financial system, and it's raping and destroying the European peoples as well as everyone else. But we're the European peoples, so we need to look after our own first.
Right.
And I found it curious that in that sort of spirit of cultural convergence and celebration of all our differences, that I'm an Irishman singing in the English language this song, which is in a Spanish flamenco style, and it's all about Greek mythology. I mean, that's as pan-European as it gets, right?
Okay.
Yeah, but no, it's such an important mission that you guys are on, and I really commend you for putting it together in such a strongly intellectual way. And I think any ways that we can package and market this idea of the Imperium to our brothers and sisters is going to be very, very helpful in our cause.
We are working on a book, Nullus and I, and this show, I guess, is really for artists and intellectuals, but I feel that at some point, in some way, these ideas have to be proliferated and made, easier to digest. Let's just put it that way. So it's.
Well, I've got some songs for you. I've got some 4-minute songs that might make it a little bit more easy to digest.
Right. It's quite beautiful how this kind of fell together. So I'm just excited about hearing that, and of course we'll link your new album and help you promote it as well. So we are wondering though if there's any suggestions or critiques you may have for us in this project. I don't know if there's anything more that you can say about it.
Well, apart from that, that travesty of the missing comma, I think in terms of the essay itself, an expansion with more concrete examples and even quotations and some of the poetry that you've described actually being shown, that sort of thing would help people to resonate with it more. That sounds like something you're going to do in your book anyway. But also, as you said, this is an intellectual kind of way to look at it. And that's important. We have to have it clear from the brightest minds. It has to be laid out in a way that is rich with logos, as you have in this essay, but it's not going to be understandable or consumable for the masses.
Exactly.
So I think distilling the essence of Imperium art into the art itself, but also maybe some more pop-oriented expressions in video podcasts or short videos or even animations or films. There's so many ways that these ideas can be expressed that, and it's not all up to you guys. You've done this great work. And I would encourage anyone to read that essay and do your best to chew on it and understand it, and then see how can you help to get these ideas out there in a simple, digestible way. Whether it's through your behavior towards other people and the things you say in conversation at parties, or whether it's through a piece of art or a piece of literature or a film script or, a podcast. There are many ways that this idea can be expressed, but what you guys are doing is trying to create something that's big enough to include us all and save us. And it's by reinvigorating our national historical identities, because that's what they've taken from us. And one thing you said there that's so important is that we have to be honest about our failings as well. We can't just glorify ourselves. And this is where some of the the white nationalists kind of fall into the the cliche white supremacy thing that our enemies really want to slap on us as a label, where they fall into this sort of reverence and worship of their own people, but they fail to be honest about where we've gone too far, where we've screwed up, where we have harmed other peoples in the past, and we shouldn't do that again. We do need to be honest about all of that, and again, this is one of those themes in your essay that has just tracked perfectly into one of the songs on my album. The song called "The Northerners" is actually about the European peoples. It's not about a specific group. There are parts of the song. It's sort of a journey through the history of the Northerners, and it's describing the rise of the European peoples in prehistory, and then the establishment of our empires, the fall of Rome, and then the expansion of the British Empire across the world, the colonization of other peoples, and the harm that's done us ultimately. And it's, I think to quote your essay, you wrote, "The message must illuminate our failures and victories. It must present tragedy and success in a manner that evokes a natural reaction that forces the receiver to confront their own reality through the time and space the art occupies." And that's exactly what I was trying to do with the Northerners, was to give an honest appraisal of really how great our people are and how great our mistakes have been.
So that brings up a thought that I'm having as I'm listening to you, is that the Imperium man of the future is a state of being. There's it's kind of, how do I put it? I often use the term white globalism, which I think is maybe not a great term, but the idea that, we have created the modern world for better or for worse, but there's a continuity, again, from where Australia to Siberia, that all the way around, and that we recognize ourselves as who we are in the context of the world. Now, imperialism and empire and these things going into other continents and et cetera, that's created suffering. There's created problems that we're still paying for and are still coping with in some kind of way. So it seems to me like what I'm taking from you in as an answer is this thought of, well, how do we then consider those things, and how can we process them in a productive way? Our enemies know how to use it against us.
Don't they just?
Colonialism, and they constantly beat that drum over and over. And you can have intellectual arguments and this and that, but I don't ever argue with the left. It doesn't make sense.
No.
It's more about talking to our own people. Well, what does it mean, and how can we make it right, and what does it mean to us? So I think that sounds like political policy. That seems like a lot of policy discussions would have to go into that. It's not necessarily a topic of art per se, but
there's an individual aspect to it too, because we can't really do this unless the individual man rebuilds himself appropriately, and that's another theme that you brought up in there about the concept of the warrior poet. And this is something that really has resonated with me my whole life, and it's really who I am. That's not a pretentious delusion. It's who my people are too. The first Higgins was an O'Higgins, the first one that I can find. His name was Sean Duff O'Higgins, and he was a bard, a poet and a public speaker and a musician, and he used those skills to sort of, I believe, wiggle his way into marrying into the O'Connor clan, who were the royals of that particular region of Ireland, and he became a lord, and my ancestors were noblemen after him, and it's a proud Irish tradition, the warrior poet. And there's a song that I heard when I was 10 years old for the first time. It was at music camp, of all places. It was the Minstrel Boy. It's an Irish folk song. And it moved me so powerfully at age 10, and I could never understand why, but I've never, ever been able to shake it. And I've actually done several recordings of it over the years, but never released any because I didn't think they were good enough. But I chose to do a new arrangement and performance of it on this album. And it's, the words go, "The minstrel boy to the war has gone, in the ranks of death you'll find him. His father's sword he has girded on, and his wild harp slung behind him. O land of song, said the warrior bard, though all the world betrays thee, one sword at least thy rights shall guard, one faithful harp shall praise thee. And I think this rebuilding of the Western man, or the Imperium man, as you guys put it, the way that our enemy has deconstructed us is they have disconnected every individual man's right and ability to perform violence from us. We've become these sort of docile cattle who are physically unable and spiritually ill-equipped to fight. And if we can't do violence to protect our rights as individuals, and especially as federated men standing side by side and defending something bigger than us, then we have no power and no sovereignty. And so the big shift that I'm seeing in the hearts of Americans and Australians and Irishmen and all of our people around the world who are awakening, with that awakening is coming a will to violence. And it's not immoral. It's not evil. Violence is a tool like any other. It can be used for good or evil. And sometimes the absolute right thing to do is violence, to defend, protect, or recapture something that's been taken from us. And this song, to me, The Minstrel Boy, it sums it up perfectly. It's a gentle-hearted boy who loves his country, who just wants to be at home playing the harp and singing songs, but he goes off to war to defend his motherland or his fatherland, and he dies for his country. But his legend remains hundreds and hundreds of years later in my heart, in the hearts of many people who know this song, and I hope my recording of it will help my Irish kin be inspired as well for the battles ahead. Because if we can't eventually do violence when it's needed, we're hopeless. We have no hope.
Yeah, and maybe we should add to that violence doing or passivity is immoral. Guilt is immoral. And we need to really refocus the question of what's moral and what's immoral. Immoral is doing nothing. Immoral is wallowing in sorrow. Immoral is feeling sorry for yourself. Immoral is
giving up.
Giving up. That's the immoral step. The morality comes from your convictions. The morality comes from your commitment to your convictions. And that's really what it is that we're trying to contextualize through Imperium art. We're saying that there are moments where you feel rage, you feel anger, you feel violence. You need to temper that violence with a morality. You need to have structure to that, because without structure, it just becomes chaotic violence, which then breeds nothing but disaster. But you still need to have that element in you.
Right. And as you put it in the essay, the concept of the warrior poet who embraces themes of violence and rage, but tempers the emotion with discipline and a conviction based on a solid moral foundation. That's the kind of man I adore. That's the kind of man that my grandfather was. You know, he was a soldier, but he was a gentleman in his heart and very tempered, very restrained. He never lost his temper, never got angry, you know, but he was trained and able to do what he needed to do in battle and in dangerous situations. And he was part of some amazing projects in his time because of that. And we see that the sort of boomer generation and onwards, we've been guilted into believing that because our ancestors did violence and it hurt other people, that, you know, basically our sword needs to be broken and buried, and we have no right to violence, but our state does. Right. We don't, but our state does.
And our enemies.
And we're slaves because we don't even run our own states. You know, our states are run by foreign interests, and so we are slaves and prisoners. And the only way for prisoners to escape the gulag is to federate together and do violence to get out, you know. So, you know, I hope that I don't know if it'll be our generation, but there's a battle ahead, a literal, genuine battle ahead for many, many people.
That's true.
I would prefer to do it myself so that my sons don't have to. So I'm doing everything I can to be psychologically, spiritually, and physically ready if it comes upon me. But it's undeniable that, you know, violence is not going to stop. It has never stopped. And as Plato said, only the dead know the end of war. Right. So do you want to just lie down and be a slave, or do you want to be preparing yourself and your posterity to break free?
Right. And we should also, for the audience and also for everyone's sake, say we're not advocating for violence. What we're saying very specifically is that we are, if we have to defend ourselves, we have to be confident in resorting to whatever means are necessary to defend ourselves.
That's right.
Yeah,
That's
it's
right.
a, it's a
And
very,
we can't do it alone as atomized individuals. That's the primary, most
Exactly.
important thing to realize. Is if you don't have brothers
right.
who are geographically proximal to you, then you're very, very vulnerable. And they want us to be atomized. They want us to be separated. They do not want us to federate. And that's why this whole COVID scam is going on, in my
Right.
opinion, to break us up, because they see the world is awakening.
Yeah.
We don't believe them anymore. We don't trust them
Yeah.
or like them anymore.
Right.
We want them out. And they can see that the people have infinitely more power than them, because we are infinitely more numerous, but we've been broken up. We don't have
Hence
unity.
hence the Imperium. That's the whole point of it.
Yes.
A global white diaspora coming together in one enormous racial awakening against all these forces. And I would say that, probably a bullet wouldn't have to be shot if we all simultaneously woke up and said, we don't comply with this anymore, get out.
As Miyamoto Musashi put it, the sharpest blade stays in its sheath.
Yeah.
Exactly.
If people fear you, they don't fuck with you.
Yeah.
So let's be fearsome so that we never have to hurt anyone, and we don't get hurt again.
And Musashi never lost a fight, if I understood correctly.
He's known as the greatest samurai. And as a guy who has done and taught Kung Fu for years, I can tell you the person who wins the fight is the one who doesn't even have to fight. I don't consider violence a preferable choice, but if it happens, you better know for sure I'm going to win. So and when people know you're going to win, they won't fight you. So again, it's about, we're the ones that have the answers, and they know it, so they're demonizing us. They're ghettoizing us through all these naughty names like white supremacists, and we're the boogeyman, all this garbage. So
and the thing is, no people has the tradition of organized and successful military action like our peoples have.
Oh, yeah.
No one can do it like we can. I mean, Africans are very, very strong, very very dominating physically sort of people, but they don't have the history of the art of war that we have. They don't have the technology or the organization or frankly the collective intellect to pull it off as successfully as we do. And it's why we've conquered and dominated the world. And it's been an error for us to do that in so many places. We don't have to do that again in the future, but we do have to break free of the gulag first and then decide what we're going to do as a people.
Exactly.
That's a really, really great point to wrap up the show on. I have to say this has been a tremendous hour and a half with you, James, and we're extremely happy that you joined us. Any closing thoughts, James?
It's been my absolute pleasure, gentlemen. I'd be delighted to do it again anytime, and I'm excited to share this with folks and promote your excellent project, and to collaborate with you guys and see how we can put our heads together in more ways to get these ideas out there and to encourage and inspire our people. And I thank everyone for listening, and I hope that you'll head over to logosrisingalbum.com, pre-order a copy of the album. It's coming out in December sometime. We're very close. I'm very excited, and I know that this is going to put wind in the sails of many of our brothers and sisters, this album.
Beautiful.
Yes.
Nullus?
I just wanted to thank James for being on this episode with us, and I'm deeply humbled and honored that that my essay resonated with you as it did. And I encourage everyone to look up James's projects, his music, and support his work, please. He's putting in a lot of time, a lot of effort, and really just creating some excellent content. So thank you very much again for being on the show with us.
Yes, thanks.
Absolute pleasure.
Indeed. And so please share and subscribe. All the links are below. And thank you very much for joining us on Imperium Art.
sword that leads the